It was late spring in the Fraser Valley, and the small community of Rosedale in British Columbia's lower mainland was easing into one of those mild May evenings that ushered in the promise of summer. On that particular night, the air was crisp but not cold, with gentle breezes carrying the scent of damp earth and nearby farmland. The sky had retained a pale glow well past dinner, thanks to the northern latitude's lingering twilight. Farmland stretched out in quiet rectangles, and houses dotted the landscape, each separated by generous green spaces and pockets of trees. A hush lay over this part of Canada's countryside, the gentle hum of distant traffic blending with the murmur of a nearby creek. At about 8 p.m. on May 7, 2015, constable-level officers of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, would later say that their radios crackled with an urgent tone. They had responded earlier that afternoon to a seemingly unrelated concern, a welfare check. But as the hours passed, the weight of something much darker settled upon everyone involved. Inside a modest home set back from the road, the kind of place where everyone assumed a family enjoyed laughter and routine comfort, lay a devastating truth. Before the sun rose again, the name Janzen would be on the lips of almost everyone in the surrounding towns, Chilliwack, Agassiz, and beyond. The details of what happened inside that house, as well as another home in a neighboring community, would shock not only local residents, but many others who read about it in the newspapers and followed the story through their television screens. It all began with a phone call just after midday on May 7th. A worried friend, uneasy about cryptic and disturbing social media posts from a man they knew, reached out to authorities. The weather that day had been seasonably pleasant, temperatures hovering around 15 DC, 59 DF, a touch of scattered drizzle in the morning that gave way to partly cloudy skies by early afternoon. Visibility was good, and there was no reason for anyone to suspect trouble behind well-kept doors. Yet as the first officer who arrived on scene would later recall, the silence around the property felt eerie. Birds sang, but there was a curious emptiness in the human soundscape. The responding officer, a junior RCMP constable new to the area, knocked on the door and found it locked. There was no immediate sign of panic or distress. Still, something compelled the officer to circle the home, peer through windows, and note the drawn curtains. A second patrol car arrived, and as dusk approached, a few neighbors stepped onto their porches, concerned by the police presence but not fully aware of its purpose. Day 26th. Albert and Sabrina settled into their new home. The last person to leave was their eldest son. The little one had twittered to the house. When a simple knock and announce brought no response, the officers made the decision to force entry, calling for backup and paramedics preemptively. The time was now approaching 6 p.m., and with each passing minute, the tension grew. Soon enough, the officers were inside, flashlights cutting through a gathering darkness as electricity hummed quietly in the background. What they found was the stuff of nightmares. No screams, no desperate pleas, only an unsettling stillness and signs of a horrifying crime. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. The victims had not been discovered by a neighbor stumbling upon tragedy, nor by a family friend noticing something amiss. This was a scene revealed through methodical, anxious police work, and the frantic warnings of a confidant who had read words on social media that no one should ever have to read. Within minutes, the perimeter was secured, crime scene tapes stretched around the property, and the presence of law enforcement swelled. Word spread quietly at first, then more loudly as officers called for their colleagues and superiors. The media wouldn't arrive until much later, alerted by tip-offs on police scanners and whispers across town. For now it was just the authorities and the dead, a tableau of sorrow that no one could fully comprehend in that moment. Rosedale was not a place known for violent crime. Nestled amid farms and gentle rolling hills, this unincorporated community was part of the district of Chilliwack in British Columbia. With a population of only a few thousand, it was a place where neighbors often greeted each other by first name at the local market, where people knew the histories of the families who'd lived there for generations. Crime, when it occurred, was generally small-scale. Break-ins, petty theft, maybe the occasional domestic disturbance. In recent months, the biggest local event had been the start of the spring planting season and a community fundraiser for the local elementary school. Rosedale prided itself on calm normality, a gently rural life not too far from urban centers like Vancouver, but far enough to preserve a certain old-fashioned neighborliness. Until that night, the local RCMP detachment rarely had to deal with anything more serious than a few rowdy youths or a rumor of drug activity. In fact, the broader Lower Mainland region was statistically safe, with a crime rate that had been stable or declining. Violent crimes that made the news were typically confined to Vancouver's downtown or in larger municipalities where gang activity occasionally flared. But here, in this quiet pocket of farmland, people felt secure. Children played in their yards without constant parental vigilance. Couples took evening walks without looking over their shoulders. Homeowners left doors unlocked when they ran errands. A sense of collective trust underpinned daily life. In the days prior, nothing seemed amiss in Rosedale's rhythms. A few local homes had undergone seasonal upkeep, painted fences and new garden beds. The grocery store carried fresh produce from local farms, and the local gas station was busy with people stocking up before weekend road trips. Tourism was on the rise in the region as summer approached. Campers heading toward the mountains, travelers eager for fishing and hiking around Chilliwack Lake, all of them passing through without a second thought about danger. There were no protests, no large cultural shifts in progress, no sensational events that might foreshadow something grim. Life had been stable, quiet, and predictable. It was in this unassuming setting that the crime, once discovered, seemed like a tear in the very fabric of community life. People in Rosedale would recall that early May of 2015 as a time when their communal innocence felt violated. The sudden arrival of a sensational tragedy on their doorstep rattled them to their core. In the aftermath, many would claim they knew the victims or the perpetrator, or at least knew of them, a fact that only deepened the shock. This was not a random act by a stranger passing through. It was something homegrown, entwined with the community's own families and histories. And as that reality sank in, the entire valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting for answers. In the center of this storm stood the victims themselves, the Janzen family. They were not celebrities, nor were they recluses. They existed in that comfortable middle space where everyday people live, working at their jobs, loving their families, dealing with the ups and downs of existence, and pursuing small dreams and quiet joys. The shocking details would emerge bit by bit over the coming days, but as the authorities stared at the broken domestic scene before them, they could only guess at the final moments that led to such unimaginable violence. Sangdapo Wenji Kinhung Gitchao. Those who eventually learned the victims' names, particularly one who had inspired so much love and pride, could only ask, how could this happen here? How could a father turn so violently on his own family, so close to home? In the stillness of that May evening, as investigators started to gather statements from neighbors and cordon off the property with bright yellow tape, Rosedale's biggest question began to form. What led to this tragedy, and why did someone do the unthinkable under the gentle gaze of these quiet Canadian mountains? It would be some time before the full story emerged, traveling along hushed telephone calls, local gossip, and the grim official briefings from police spokespersons who struggled to balance transparency with sensitivity. When it did, the truth would unsettle everyone who heard it. Still, in those initial hours of discovery, no one could imagine the narrative of pain, mental anguish, and despair that had turned a seemingly normal household into the scene of a family annihilation. The shock would cling to Rosedale for years to come, leaving everyone to wonder if they had ever truly known their neighbors, or if the bright and friendly faces they encountered at the local bakery or post office might be concealing unimaginable torment. Before piecing together that final mosaic, one must understand who these victims were in life. Emily, the daughter, was at the heart of this tragedy, a young woman with a gift for music, beloved by friends and teachers alike. Laurel, the mother, known for her kindness and warm heart. Shelley, the aunt, who had been deeply tied into the family's life for decades. These were not faceless names, their stories woven into the tapestry of this small community. To understand the crime, one must first understand them, who they were, what they loved, who they befriended, and how they lived in the days leading up to that fatal night. Emily had been the bright star of her family. At 19, she stood at the cusp of adulthood, slender and poised, with long brown hair that she often braided or tied back. Slightly above average height and graceful, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her passion early in life. Born in Vancouver, Emily spent most of her formative years in the Lower Mainland. From a young age, she took to singing as naturally as breathing. Teachers at her elementary school recalled her humming melodies in the corridors. By her early teens, she was performing in choirs, singing solos at school concerts, and dreaming of a future on stage. Her voice was often described as angelic, a mezzo-soprano tone that could warm a room and bring audiences to tears. Yet behind that voice, Emily struggled with severe migraines. These were not the garden variety headaches that come and go with a glass of water. Hers were debilitating, lasting hours or days, sometimes forcing her to retreat to dark, silent rooms. Friends remembered how she would sometimes have to miss parties, concerts, or important social events because a migraine had knocked her flat. Doctors were consulted, treatments tried. Some days Emily seemed on the verge of relief. On others, the pain robbed her of the joy she found in singing and performing. Despite these challenges, Emily nurtured dreams of making a career in music. She had attended a local high school with a strong arts program and performed in nearly all the school productions. She also participated in workshops and private lessons with local vocal coaches, who raved about her discipline and talent. There were even murmurs of her auditioning for prestigious music programs in Vancouver or beyond, seeking a path that might lead her onto professional stages. In the months before her death, Emily had been active on social media. Instagram posts about a recent concert she attended, Facebook updates sharing her gratitude for supportive friends. She revealed hints of her struggle with migraines, sometimes noting how pain forced her to stay home instead of joining her friends for a movie or a hike. In her heart, she hoped that some new treatment or therapy might let her truly live the life she imagined. Emily's mother, Laurel, stood as a pillar of support through all this. In her early 50s, Laurel had a warm presence and an unassuming grace. Medium height and slightly round-faced, she wore her hair short, practical and neat. Laurel grew up in the Lower Mainland as well, part of a large family with roots stretching back generations in British Columbia. She met her husband Randy in her early 20s, and together they built a life that seemed secure and loving. Laurel was well liked in the community, known for her gentleness and willingness to lend a helping hand. She had worked for many years in administrative roles at local businesses, mostly office work that allowed her to keep regular hours. Outside of work, she was devoted to her family. Friends described her as patient and kind, the sort of person who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who brought home baked goods to neighbors who were ill, and who showed up with a casserole when someone's spouse passed away. Laurel's ambitions were modest and family-centered. She wanted stability for Emily, dreamed of seeing her daughter's name on a concert program, and hoped that medical science would find a way to ease the girl's migraines. In recent years, Laurel had also faced her own health challenges, nothing as severe as Emily's condition, but enough to limit her high-energy outings. Adapt, focusing instead on the comfort of home, the support of close friends, and the joy of watching Emily grow into a talented young woman. Laurel had extended family nearby, including her sister-in-law Shelley, a presence who wove in and out of their lives with the easy familiarity that close-knit families enjoy. Laurel's days were a mixture of routine chores, quiet hobbies like gardening and reading, and supporting Emily's pursuits. She had a small circle of friends, middle-aged women who met occasionally for coffee and conversation. Laurel wasn't one to broadcast her troubles. She preferred listening over talking, guiding over dictating, and comforting over complaining. Shelley, the aunt, was the kind of relative who bridged generations. While not living in the same home, She was close enough both geographically and emotionally to be a frequent part of Emily's life. Described by acquaintances as friendly and outgoing, Shelley was roughly the same age as Laurel. She lived a short drive away in Langley, within easy reach of the family's Rosedale home. Shelley had a career in a small logistics firm, working with clients and handling administrative tasks. Like Laurel, she was well respected in the community. When Emily performed, Shelley would attend whenever possible, proud and supportive. She was part of family gatherings, holidays, birthdays, and Sunday dinners. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Shelley's life seemed ordinary, working regular hours, planning weekend activities, maybe considering a short vacation when summer arrived. Nothing indicated the storm that would soon strike her life. Over the 48 hours leading up to May 7, Emily's routine seemed mostly unremarkable. She had recently seen a doctor about her migraines and was waiting on some test results. A few days earlier, she'd posted on Facebook about feeling hopeful after speaking with a new specialist who had recommended some alternative therapies. Her credit card transactions in the last 2 days before the murder showed a small coffee purchase at a local cafe and a modest grocery transaction, perhaps snacks or something to cook at home. Phone records indicated calls and texts with a close friend and with her mother, Laurel. There were no outward signs of trouble. She might have been thinking about a singing audition or a new piece of music she wanted to learn. That's how she'd said. Her social media showed a brief exchange with a friend about an upcoming concert in Vancouver. She last logged in to check her messages late the night before May 7th. No alarming tone or content in her posts. Laurel's final hours also seemed calm, according to later investigations. She was likely at home, completing routine tasks, laundry, some tidying up, making dinner plans. The phone company's records showed a brief call she made to her sister-in-law Shelley about coordinating a family gathering. Nothing strange. Shelley, too, appeared to be going about her normal life, working her shift and stopping at a drugstore on her way home. None of them posted alarming messages. None of them reached out to friends in desperation. None of them visited unusual places. Their routines were as stable and predictable as any small-town families would be. Yet beneath this facade of normalcy, something was terribly wrong. The man soon identified as the perpetrator, Randy Janzen, had been struggling. Over the years, he had grown increasingly anxious and distraught over Emily's suffering. He had confided in certain friends that it broke his heart to see his daughter in pain. He had expressed frustration that doctors and treatments were not giving her the relief she needed. While Emily and Laurel tried to move forward, Randy's emotional state was deteriorating. He was described as a man carrying a profound sadness, almost a desperation, to fix things for Emily, to take away her suffering by any means necessary. It was not clear to anyone, at least not until it was too late, that Randy's troubled mind had begun to twist love into something monstrous. In the final days before the murders, Randy displayed subtle behavioral changes that might have escaped notice if one wasn't looking closely. He spent more time alone, was quieter, and might have seemed distracted or tense. He had withdrawn from certain social activities. Friends and acquaintances later recalled that he appeared weary and nervous, but they never imagined the depth of his turmoil. He made no direct threats. He raised no open alarms. Emily's own state of mind in these final moments is harder to discern. She had battles with pain, with frustration, and with the limitations migraines placed on her life. Yet by all accounts, she was not on the verge of despair. She harbored hopes and dreams, and although she found herself challenged by her health, she was still forging ahead with her passion for music. The world still offered her possibilities. Laurel, too, would have been carrying concern for Emily, perhaps discussing their next steps, maybe exploring a new doctor's recommendation. As for Shelley, she was simply living her life, planning to stay close with her extended family, never imagining she would be caught in the crossfire of Randy's desperate and tragic decision-making. In retrospect, certain conversations might stand out. Perhaps Emily had a moment of vulnerability, confiding in a friend about how her migraines made her feel trapped, or maybe Laurel expressed worry in a private phone call about Randy's increasing worry over Emily's suffering. But no direct alarms were sounded. Had Emily's health improved recently? Might Randy's mood have shifted in a different direction? These are unanswerable questions. On the surface, the family seemed stable and loving, if under the strain of chronic illness. The darkness that Randy harbored remained hidden until it was unleashed in an act of final, irreversible violence. To comprehend the perpetrator's background, one must travel back through Randy Janzen's earlier life. Born and raised in British Columbia, Randy had a seemingly conventional upbringing. He was of medium build with broad shoulders and a face that, in younger years, smiled readily. In adulthood, he stood a little over 6 feet tall, carrying a presence that could fill a room. Yet he was not known to be physically aggressive or intimidating in public life. He grew up in a family that valued honesty, hard work, and community participation. Randy completed his basic education locally, attending schools in the Lower Mainland. He was neither top of his class nor at the bottom, an ordinary student who seemed destined for an ordinary life. After high school, Randy tried his hand at various careers. He wasn't a high-profile businessman or a notable public figure. Instead, he held down steady jobs, mostly in trades and construction fields, doing honest work to provide for his family. He saved money, invested in a home, and eventually married Laurel. The couple worked together to build a modestly comfortable life. Financial records indicated no massive debt load. They lived within their means, paying their bills, keeping up with mortgage payments, and maintaining a tidy home. Over the years, Randy's identity became increasingly tied to his family, especially Emily. He placed enormous value on her well-being and future. Friends remembered how proud he was of Emily's singing talents, how he attended her performances and bragged about her abilities. Yet as Emily's migraines grew worse in her later teenage years, Randy's pride turned to deep worry. He began to fixate on his daughter's suffering. Some neighbors said they saw him more often pacing in his yard, appearing troubled. He made vague comments at times, like, "I wish I could do more for her," or "It hurts me to see her in pain." Most took these as natural expressions of parental concern. Randy's psychological profile, reconstructed after the tragedy by experts and investigators, suggested that he may have suffered from severe depression and anxiety, possibly triggered or worsened by Emily's condition. He had no known history of mental health treatment, no documented psychiatric diagnoses, but the combination of paternal protectiveness, frustration with ongoing medical struggles, and a sense of helplessness formed a dangerous psychological brew. Randy may have begun to see the world through a lens of despair, where solutions seemed impossible through normal means. He had no criminal record to speak of, no earlier incidences of violence that reached official channels. He might have had minor disagreements with neighbors or gotten into heated arguments during stressful times, but nothing that prepared anyone to suspect he would commit violence. His wife Laurel and sister Shelley likely believed Randy was just feeling the strain of Emily's health problems, not imagining he could turn lethal. Community members described Randy as a family man. He wasn't deeply involved in the church or the local Rotary Club, but he was polite and cordial when encountered in daily life. If he drank, it was moderate. He wasn't known for substance abuse. He seemed a model of normalcy, if a bit withdrawn toward the end. His routine habits included weekend outings with family, maybe a day trip to the coast, or attending Emily's recitals. He occasionally met up with friends to watch hockey games on TV, a standard pastime in Canada. In the months leading up to the murders, however, he began withdrawing from these casual social engagements. Close acquaintances later reported that Randy had canceled a few meetups and seemed off when they did run into him, providing no details and brushing off inquiries with a half-hearted happy stories. Numerous times he questioned Randy's identity and went so far as to defend himself earlier. He had reported that Randy had taken himself off the medications he was on and pledged free of it. The unraveling of Randy's psyche likely began with the escalation of Emily's migraines. To see one's child in constant pain can torment a parent, especially someone who measures their worth by their ability to protect and provide. Each failed treatment and disappointing diagnosis may have reinforced Randy's sense of helplessness. Over time, this festering despair could have led him to a distorted moral horizon, where he believed that ending Emily's life would release her from pain. In that twisted logic, killing Laurel and Shelley might have seemed like a way to spare them from grief and heartbreak after Emily's death, or to leave no witnesses to the crime he believed was an act of mercy. It is a logic alien to most, but tragically not unheard of in cases of family annihilation where a perpetrator's mental instability warps their moral compass. Before the final crime, there may have been small warning signs. Randy might have purchased a weapon quietly, visited a shooting range, or taken steps to ensure he could carry out his plan without outside interference. He may have left digital traces, browser history searches about methods, times, or places, but such details were never fully confirmed publicly. Investigators piecing together the puzzle found no explicit suicide note beyond what was later discovered on social media. Witnesses, when asked, had not heard Randy speak openly of harming himself or others. He remained a cipher until the very end. The trigger event for this unimaginable act was possibly a recent spike in Emily's suffering. Perhaps an appointment did not yield the hoped-for results. Maybe Randy noticed Emily's emotional exhaustion and interpreted it as unbearable agony. Or maybe something else, entirely unknown, snapped inside him on May 7, making him believe that the only way out was to destroy the very people he loved. The public would come to know only what Randy revealed in a shocking, last-minute social media confession, posted shortly before he took his final destructive steps. But by that time, the outcome was irreversible. On the day leading up to the murders, Randy's movements might have seemed ordinary, running errands, returning home, pacing the house. He could have made calls or sent texts, though records would show nothing obviously incriminating. Inside his mind, however, the decision was likely made. The crimes he committed would not be impulsive outbursts of rage, but rather acts of premeditated violence, born of distorted love and despair. To many who study such tragedies, this pattern is frighteningly recognizable. The father figure, overwhelmed by a perceived inability to protect his child from suffering, turns lethal. It is a horrific logic that defies reason. As the hours before the murders ticked by, Randy's isolation grew absolute. Any chance to reach out, to speak a word of alarm or seek help, vanished. In that silence, he prepared for an action that would forever separate him from the realm of normal life. If there had been a visitor to the home that afternoon, they might have encountered a strangely calm Randy, a man at peace with his terrible choice. Without intervention, fate marched forward. The crime itself took place quietly. Late in the evening, just as darkness settled over the rural property in Rosedale, Randy killed Emily and Laurel inside their home. The details, pieced together from forensic evidence and autopsy reports, indicated that he used a firearm, striking swiftly, leaving no chance for escape or rescue. There were no screams reported by neighbors, no frantic calls for help. After disposing of their bodies with a chilling calm, Randy drove to Shelley's residence in Langley and ended her life as well. He operated under a timeline that allowed him to complete these acts before any alarm was raised. It was only the social media confession he posted afterward, a warped love letter and twisted justification, that brought the police bearing down on his location. Once the murders were committed, Randy retreated to his home in Rosedale where he barricaded himself inside. The police, alerted by that disturbing online post and by concerned friends who had read it, arrived to a silent, locked residence. They called out to Randy, tried negotiating, attempted to find a peaceful resolution, but got nowhere. Before dawn's light could reveal the horror, the house went up in flames. Investigators believe Randy took his own life inside the burning building. The standoff ended in a conflagration that destroyed much of the physical evidence inside, leaving investigators to rely heavily on digital records, forensic analysis of what remained, and eyewitness accounts. In the days after, forensic experts painstakingly processed the scene. Firefighters had contained the blaze, but the damage was severe. Charred remnants of a once cozy family home were sifted through. DNA evidence, bullet trajectories, and blood spatter analysis all helped investigators reconstruct the final moments. Phone records and computer files were scrutinized, searching for a reason that could never fully satisfy the community's need for understanding. Investigators also looked at digital footprints. Randy's social media confession served as the linchpin that tied all these crimes together. It read like a tortured letter, in which Randy claimed he had freed Emily from her pain and spared others the agony of living with her loss. The public would learn of this note in brief summaries offered by law enforcement and media outlets, its actual texts censored for sensitivity. It provided no peace to those who knew and loved the victims. Instead, it turned a tragic crime into a study in paternal anguish gone horribly, unimaginably wrong. The community struggled in the aftermath. For neighbors who had once welcomed the family, the shock was personal. Memorial services were organized to honor Emily's life and talent. Mourners placed flowers and notes at makeshift shrines on the sidewalk. Local newspapers ran tributes and op-eds discussing mental health, familial stress, and the importance of vigilance when loved ones show signs of psychological distress. There were no easy answers. Only a collective sense of mourning and disbelief. The investigation that followed tested the skill of the RCMP and their forensic experts. They meticulously documented what could be gleaned from the ashes, the bullet fragments, and the remaining items in the car Randy had driven to Shelley's home. Every piece of evidence had to be logged and analyzed, though it was clear from the start that the perpetrator, Randy, was dead, and no trial would take place. This simplified some legal aspects but complicated the community's ability to find closure. With the accused gone, there would be no public court proceedings, no cross-examination of motives. The truth of why Randy acted as he did remained largely contained in that final, heartbreaking confession and in the haunted memories of those who knew the family. Had this case gone to trial, prosecutors would have outlined the timeline, displayed the physical evidence, and called witnesses to attest to Randy's character and Emily's suffering. The defense might have invoked diminished capacity or mental illness, painting Randy as a man driven to madness by grief. But these hypothetical proceedings would never occur. Instead, the legal process focused on verifying the chain of events, issuing official death certificates, and providing what details the public record demanded. In the absence of a formal trial, the community turned inward. Schools and local organizations offered mental health resources, grief counseling, and forums for discussion. Families closed their ranks, checking in more frequently with one another, worried that something dark might lurk behind another neighbor's smile. The tragedy sparked conversations about how societies support individuals with chronic pain, how families cope with despair, and how mental health services can be improved. In the wake of this crime, some advocated for changes in medical systems to better treat intractable conditions like Emily's migraines, while others stressed the importance of recognizing and addressing signs of mental instability in family members. Over the long term, Rosedale and the surrounding communities would remember Emily's voice. There would be scholarships created in her memory, funds raised to support local arts programs. Laurel's quiet kindness would be recalled in anecdotes about her small acts of generosity. Shelley's life, while perhaps less publicly known, was mourned by her colleagues and friends, who missed her easy laughter and competence at work. All three victims left holes that could not be filled. For investigators, the case demonstrated the importance of digital forensics. Randy's social media confession served as a window into his tortured reasoning. Experts urged technology companies, mental health professionals, and communities to find ways to detect and respond to online cries for help or warning signs before tragedies unfold. The event became a case study discussed among criminologists and psychologists, who tried to fathom what leads a seemingly normal father to commit such a terrible act. Though rare, family annihilations form a known category of crime driven by distorted logic and crushing despair. This case, occurring in a peaceful Canadian community better known for its scenery than for its violence, was a stark reminder that no place is immune. In the decades to follow, Those who study true crime might come across this story and note how it parallels other cases of intimate family homicide. They would see a pattern: a loving parent twisted by mental anguish, a desperate solution sought in the unthinkable, an entire family lost. Rosedale's tragedy would stand as another piece of historical evidence that mental health crises can become deadly when left unaddressed or unnoticed. Perhaps future reforms, policies, and educational programs would emerge partly in response to such tragedies. It takes time and societal will to translate the pain of one community's heartbreak into tangible improvements that might prevent another family from sharing a similar fate. For those who lived through it, the neighbors, friends, teachers, and local merchants who knew the Janzen family, no intellectual analysis could erase the emotional scar. They would always remember that mild spring day in 2015, when the quiet hum of rural life was shattered, and the final secret of the Janzen household was revealed in flame and sorrow. They would carry the memory, ensuring that Emily, Laurel, and Shelley did not fade into statistics. Instead, they remained in the community's collective consciousness as people who once laughed, loved, and tried their best to live a normal life in a peaceful place, until the moment when everything fell apart. In the end, this story is not merely about crime, it's about the fragility of the human mind and the devastating consequences when despair outweighs hope. It's about the importance of vigilance and compassion, about recognizing that even the calmest communities can harbor unseen storms. The loss of this family in Rosedale is a reminder that everyone, neighbors, friends, healthcare providers, and mental health professionals, plays a part in safeguarding one another against the darkest impulses that can arise when pain and desperation go unchecked. Though no trial would ever take place, the crime's investigation offered a thorough understanding of how the events unfolded, leaving less mystery than many unsolved cases. The legal mechanisms that followed such a tragedy, autopsies, official inquests, public statements, provided finality, if not comfort. Hence, Rosedale's legacy from that spring day would be the knowledge that tragedies can happen anywhere, and that the task of preventing them, of listening carefully to the quiet signs of distress, remains ongoing. In the memory of the victims, the community resolved to do better, to help one another, and to hold tight to the love that binds families together, so that no parent ever again feels forced to choose a path as dark and irreversible as the one Randy took that night in May 2015.